Hey everyone, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 38th episode of the Writ Podcast. The start of the election campaign in Ontario is only about 3 weeks away, and so the parties at Queen's Park are really getting ready for that campaign. We're seeing candidates being nominated, we're seeing advertisements hit the airwaves. There's been lots of developments, so to help us through it, I'm joined again by Sabrina and Nanji of Queen's Park Observer. Hi, Sabrina.
Hey, Eric. Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, there's been just so much to talk about. And I wanted to start with the candidates because the candidates are really how, the race is going to be won. And the PCs had a few interesting names. The ones that I, flagged was the former police chief, Mark Saunders, and someone named Michael Ford, who's going to be running for the PCs. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, political dynasty is running strong here in Ontario. Michael Ford has thrown his hat into the ring. He'll be the PC party candidate in York Southwestern. That riding is currently held by the NDP, but I would say definitely a competitive spot. I had heard some Liberals were a little nervous about that too, because Michael Ford is a big name. He's got a lot of capital behind him at the local level for sure, and of course the Ford name obviously goes a long way in politics, and especially in that area of Toronto too. It's not quite Etobicoke, what we call Ford Nation, the heart of the Ford family's political base, but it's close. It's close enough that for sure it's going to give the NDP's candidate Faisal Hassan a run for his money. He's definitely someone to contend with. I would say a star candidate. And you also mentioned Saunders as well, the former police chief. I think it's kind of funny how we see our police brass entering into politics. He's not the first one to do it. I don't think he'll be the last. We've got Bill Blair, on the Liberal benches federally too. And that's going to be a really interesting race to watch over in Don Valley West, because we've got some high profile contenders there. He's running against Erwin Elman, another former, if I can put it that way, the former child and youth advocate who's carrying the NDP banner over there. And this is former Premier Kathleen Wynne's stronghold. Wynne was one of 7 Liberals that managed to hang on to her seat. Obviously, she was leader at the time. Former premier, no longer a leader anymore. Now it's Stephen Del Duca as the captain over there. But Wynne is actually making her farewell speech in the legislature this week, as with a lot of outgoing incumbents. And incumbents tend to get a leg up. So I think, especially York Southwestern, like we mentioned, and Don Valley, these are contentious spots. And I think, it's going to be a tough slog for the Liberals too. The Liberals have Stephanie Bowman, running in the hopes of, replacing Kathleen Wynne and taking that seat. I would say she's a bit lower profile. I know a lot of Grits that I was talking to on the ground, they were excited about, her potential fundraising power. Obviously, campaigns cost money. The Liberals need it. We can get into the ads and the cost and all that. But I would say Bowman is a bit of a lower profile candidate, and she's really got her work cut out for her going against Saunders and Elman there. She's a banking executive, a strong contender. But I think in terms of if you're knocking on the doors, maybe people won't, you're not necessarily a household name like the other two. So Some interesting races to watch for sure.
And it's interesting that for the PCs, these are not seats that they already hold, that they're, the incumbent's not running. And so they're putting a star candidate there. These are seats that they're on the offensive. They're trying to take them from the other parties.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's a strong offense for sure. I think we've talked about it before, the GTA, the outskirts of Toronto. These are typically, they swing between Liberal and NDP. That's not to say the PCs don't have, their tenterhooks in there, but a lot of these spots, they tend to swing, any which way. So it's not a slam dunk for any party by any means. And I think we're going to see a bit more of that from the Conservatives trying to pick up spots. Most of the polling is suggesting these days that the Ford government is on track to win, another mandate. I think it'll be the big question is whether it's going to be a majority or minority. How big of a majority can they get? So we're going to see them pushing really hard to pick up some seats that they might be worried about, especially, with the loss of a bunch of incumbents. Every party is losing some of their incumbents, and that's a big loss. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out on the ground for sure.
While the PCs, as you mentioned, they're leading in the polls. We've seen some polls that give them a lead of double digits over the other parties. Most polls have the Liberals or the New Democrats both below 30%. So really does seem to be, at this stage, the PC's campaign to win. So are you seeing this play out in terms of who the Liberals and the New Democrats have been able to recruit? Have there been any kind of star candidates that suggest, there is some momentum on their sides, that some people believe that they can form a government?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some. I mentioned Erwin Ellman for the NDP. The Liberals, not too long ago, were pumping up Lee Fairclough over in the Etobicoke area, Etobicoke Lakeshore. That's held by the PCs right now, Christine Hogarth. And it's actually one riding that I think a lot of Conservatives are a little bit nervous about too, and definitely all parties can kind of see, that area. Maybe they can take it. There were a lot of close races in 2018 too. But the Liberals that I've talked to, they're not so happy about Lee Fairclough, who's a hospital CEO, but she works in Kitchener. Of course, she lives in Etobicoke, but you can definitely expect the PCs to kind of attack her on that line. Like, she's not from the riding, that type of thing. There's no rules against that, or I should say, she doesn't work in the riding. But we have seen, the Liberals also, they were touting their health care minded candidates. They've got registered nurses, Tyler Watt, I'm thinking in Nepean, the underdog, to go against Lisa MacLeod, who's represented the Conservative minister who's represented that area for a very long time now. But I think it will be interesting. One of the areas I'm watching is Windsor, because the NDP have lost a couple of their incumbents there who won't be running again, Percy Hatfield and Taras Nadishak. The Conservatives had nominated their candidates there months ago, and they've been knocking on doors, so it's hard to build a profile. Incumbents get the benefit of running on the record, people kind of recognize who you are, that type of thing. So, at the end of the day, I guess all politics is local, right? Like you got to talk to the people at the doors. We don't necessarily vote for our leaders, but I think you're right that the more compelling outcome for me to watch is going to be who's runner up. Like, will it be the NDP or the Liberals? And so we're going to see a lot of, really intense battles there.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Kitchener. I've recently written a little bit about those ridings. It's really a battleground in the upcoming election. So if you have a good name in Kitchener, it would seem like a good place to put one. But we'll see how that's going to play out. You mentioned before the ad. So we have seen the PCs come out with their ad, which has their slogan, which is "Get it done." Bit of a command there, get it done. The New Democrats also seem to have put out their ads. They're using some similar language, though their slogan is different. But you mentioned, who's going to be the runner-up. We did see an attack ad from the PCs against Andrew Horwath.
Yeah, and a couple of months ago, before there's these restrictions on how much parties can spend. So they had these. Right now, we're in the pre-writ period. So we've got some limits, but just before this kicked off a couple of months ago, we saw both the NDP and the PCs sort of attacking Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca. Of course, they were attacking each other as well, but we didn't really hear much from the Liberals, and it's still been crickets from that party too. They are, relatively speaking, cash strapped right now. Campaign ads, TV, radio, they're not cheap, and so I've kind of crunched some numbers and looked at the Facebook ads, and the Liberals are the ones, doing the most on social media, whereas the NDP are doing social media ads as well, but not so much coming from the PCs. So I think it's interesting, and it kind of tells you, who's the person to beat here. And you're right, there were similar slogans from the NDP and the PCs. In one of the NDP ads, Andrew Horwath says, "Together we can get it done." That seems to echo what we heard from the PCs. They also had a new jingle, about "Only Doug will get it done." I'm not going to subject you guys to me singing it, but yeah, if you want to check it out. I mean, I guess like it remains to be seen how effective these ads are, but I think that the time is really ticking for the Liberals to do this. They've they haven't really put out much we've kind of seen Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca, he's ditched his glasses. It seems like he's getting a little bit of a makeover there. But at the end of the day, if you allow your opponents to define you before you define yourself, that could really hit you at the polls. Not a lot of people know about Stephen Del Duca, and what they do know is not so great. He's gotten in trouble with the Auditor General for when he was transportation minister, putting GO stations maybe in his riding that weren't, what experts were suggesting. He kind of tried to bypass local rules to get a pool in his backyard. Like, expect to hear a lot of that coming from the opposing parties. But time's ticking. We're only a couple of weeks out from the start of the campaign, and it's kind of like, where are the ads? And the party says, stay tuned, they're coming. But I think, we're going to see a lot more from the PCs. Their theme seems to be everything's going great. Ontario's coming back. Doug Ford says yes. That's a huge change from 2018 and the tune they were singing then, talking about austerity measures, balancing the books. And now it's like, we're big spenders. We're going to make it rain. And so it's funny what a couple of years in the pandemic will do to your mandate, I guess.
Yeah, as campaign songs go, I've heard worse for the PCs. It's not too bad, but for the Liberals, if, as you mentioned, if they have less money, they got to be a lot more strategic with how they spend it. So the calculation might be that when attention is going to be highest during the campaign, that would be the time to buy the ads. But it does, as you mentioned, set themselves up to be defined by their opponents. So there's a risk there. But if you only have a certain amount of money, because in Ontario there is a public subsidy, right, of the political parties, and it is based in terms of how many votes you had. So just there, the Liberals didn't do well in the last election. So right there, they're making, they're getting a lot less money than the other parties, and not to mention just having to raise money too, right, which is a bit of a challenge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had looked at the Q1 fundraising numbers, and the Liberals and the NDP were close. And of course, I should add the caveat that they don't include disclosure. Elections Ontario doesn't disclose donations under $200. The NDP says they've actually made a lot more than what's publicly out there right now, because they tend to be the party of smaller number donors, I should say. So people giving like $20, $30, as opposed to thousands of dollars, which we've seen from the PCs. But the Conservatives, not surprisingly, have just blown the other parties out of the water. So they've got money to burn right now on the campaign. And look, the Liberals, they boast about wiping out the party's debt from 2018. So I think for the most part, they're feeling that they won't tell us that they're cash strapped right now, but they're not really telling us the numbers either. The real numbers, like the NDP says that they're over $1 million raised in Q1, and they say that it's more than the other parties. But of course, that's based on their internal numbers. So I guess the line is show us the money, and we'll get to see some more of this, like after the election, when everyone's filing their receipts and doing their due diligence with the public disclosures there. But campaigns cost money, and that per vote subsidy you mentioned is going to be phased out. So it'll be interesting to see where these parties are going to be directing their resources, and that'll maybe indicate where they're feeling confident and where they're feeling a little more at risk.
I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the impact from some things that have been happening here in Ottawa. The first one being the confidence and supply agreement that the federal Liberals and New Democrats signed to keep Justin Trudeau's government in power until 2025, if the agreement holds. And it meant that Stephen Del Duca and Andrew Horwath had to answer some questions about what they would do if the PCs fall into a minority government. Are we likely to see, from what they've said, are we likely to see the same kind of agreement if the PCs fall short of the 63 seats they need for a majority government?
Well, certainly no party is going to say that outright, just as they're heading into a campaign. So actually, this federal pact has kind of made it a bit awkward for their provincial cousins. Andrea Horwath saying that both parties, I should say, not wanting to prop up a Ford minority. They haven't really had any formal discussions with each other. I think Stephen Del Duca was a little more cagey, saying, the public wants to see politicians work together, but so far the Doug Ford government, he can't support a lot of those things. So a lot of awkward questions. I think the big winner in this whole thing has been Doug Ford. Keeping the Liberals in power till 2025. If things hold, as you said, I think I've mentioned before to your listeners that Ontario tends to be the opposite provincially as we are federally. So we've got Conservatives at Queen's Park right now, and we saw in September Ontario voted overwhelmingly in favor of the Liberals federally. So we've also seen Trudeau and Ford have this bromance when just a couple of months ago they were ripping on each other on the campaign trail. So it's funny, the difference between campaigning and governing, but the Ford government is making a lot of big spendy promises, a lot of cash that's going to have to come from the feds. And so I'm sure the premier doesn't want to be rocking the boat right now either. They have this ambitious transit plan for the GTA and Hamilton area that's not fully costed. A lot of that money is expected to come from the feds. They'll need federal support. We just got the announcement for this big childcare deal finally signed in Ontario, the last provincial holdout. So I don't think that the Ford government is going to rock the boat. I think that it'll be interesting to see what this means for the Liberals and NDP and candidates on the campaign trail. We had seen in 2019 in the federal election that Stephen Del Duca and his candidates were kind of piggybacking on some of the door knocking going on there. He was out and about with federal MP wannabes, kind of trying to build up his profile as well. I wonder if we'll see that happen, come May during the campaign. We had seen, Wynne and Trudeau, playing that game a little bit too in the past. And so I think it's kind of made things a bit awkward for the parties in Ontario, having to answer these questions. So I think that's why I think, the race for second place is one of the most compelling to watch and to see, procedurally speaking, like what a minority would mean for Ontario.
Yeah. And each of them, I'm sure, wants to not prop up Ford government, but be propped up by the other party, not to be the one propping up anybody, right? But you mentioned the childcare deal, and it just seems to be another thing that the federal Liberals have done that is not going to be doing many favors to their provincial cousins or the NDP, because it seems to have taken away an attack line from the opposition parties against the Ford government.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, there's not much to harp on. Like, the deal is done now. And really the only attack line that the opposition has is, well, it's a little too late, what took so long? It was an election ploy. I know this is going to mean a lot for families. And of course, a lot of folks say it could have gone farther, but Ontario can now brag that they got some more infrastructure dollars. And it kind of takes some of the steam out of the opposition parties who have already had a really tough time, especially during the pandemic, getting their message out there. And so I think we're going to see a lot more reminders of, the pre-pandemic Doug Ford days, a lot of talk about broken promises, things like that. And now it's a bit ironic. We've seen the Liberals, they're accusing the PCs of going on a pre-election spending spree, which, they have. They're making it rain. There's funding announcements every day. Almost every day, I should say. And, that's something we had also seen from the Liberals, like just before 2018 too. So I think every party does it. I don't know, how much the electorate is going to buy into that, but I think that certainly a lot of opposition critics feel like the Conservatives are trying to essentially buy votes right now. There's a lot of rebates coming through, license plate sticker fees coming back, that type of thing. I don't know if that's enough to get someone off the couch and go to the polls and vote for you or not. But certainly I think that there's a lot of bigger, more thoughtful policies on affordability that are going to have to come from every party, especially on things like housing. We talked about childcare. So pocketbook issues are going to be the big sticking point, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned pre-pandemic Doug Ford. And if people remember where the Ford PCs were at the end of 2019, Doug Ford's approval ratings were in the tank. The party was trailing in the polls. It looked like this was already a failure of a government. And then a couple of years later, it's his approval ratings back to where it was when he won the election in 2018. His party's back in the lead in the polls with a pretty solid advantage over the other parties. It does make you wonder, though, what could happen with the pandemic over the next a couple months, there talk now about the sixth wave, and that the government's really kind of opted out of trying to do anything about it. Maybe it'll all work out, and by the time we get into the mid-campaign, this wave has receded again, and the hospitals haven't been overwhelmed or anything. But it does seem like it could be a bit of a risk for the Ford PCs if the timing works out badly for them.
Yeah, I mean, remember just before the pandemic hit, we were talking about like visibility of license plates, like that feels like a whole other lifetime to me now. But you're right. I think that generally speaking, we've seen it in public polling, and also, what I'm hearing from the PCs, that their own internal polling suggests that when the COVID situation is bad, things are closed, people are unhappy, and the government is unpopular. That's not super surprising. So it seems that Ontario has decided now we're going to, let the virus run. And I think, now we're seeing a lot of maybe backtracking on that a little bit as we're seeing cases come up. Stephen Del Duca just came out today and called for bringing in indoor mask mandates in certain areas just to kind of deal with this. Whereas we saw just, a few days ago, he was in this campaign style rally with his candidates, and they were all bunched together, a big crowd, no masks on. So, the public vibe is going to absolutely impact how the parties are dealing with this. But I think that, reminding people about Doug Ford's failures, that's something that the opposition parties are really going to have to capitalize on. They haven't done it so much, but reminding people, remember that first budget the Conservatives put out back in 2018, all those cuts, sure, they've been reversed, but I think one line I heard from Stephen Del Duca was that everyone knows the real Doug Ford. He's really a cutter. He's not an investor. So I don't know if the public's going to buy that. I think that folks that I'm speaking to, even people who might not vote Conservative, or they might be a Doug Ford hater, if I can put it that way, because Ford is kind of his own entity, politically speaking, as opposed to the traditional Conservative Party politics. But they think that the Premier has done a decent job. He's done his best in handling COVID. It feels like a bit deja vu now, with hospitalizations coming back. So it feels a bit touch and go, but I think with the weather getting better, it doesn't seem like there's any sign that people want to shut back down, at least from the government side right now. But of course, things could change.
Yeah, of course. That's politics. We'll finish on this just at this stage, we're a few weeks from the start of the campaign. You've talked to people from each of the parties. What's your sense of the mood? Do the PCs feel confident? Does the opposition feel not confident? What's your sense of how people are feeling at this stage?
Well, everyone's acting very confident. I can say that everyone, and maybe just because, talking to the reporters, it's like that. I think there's more of a concern about like where the standings are going to be. I think, like, I know Conservatives are we going to be majority, minority? What happens then? So some of the closer races, I think they'll be pushing hard there. And same with the Liberals and the NDP. I mean, they're kind of battling each other out too right now. And so it'll be really interesting to see who gets official opposition. I know that the Liberals are definitely trying very hard to get a lot of their Toronto area spots, their GTA spots back from the NDP. I mean, we could talk about 2018 again until the cows come home, change election. I think a lot of those ridings, for instance, St. Paul's in Toronto, where I live, we have an NDP representative in Jill Andrew now, but that riding even federally has been, a liberal bastion. So I think, people will tell you they're feeling confident. I think the money is also, maybe a little bit of an area where they're feeling a bit, weak, especially the on the Liberal side of things. They brought Stephen Del Duca to power as their leader, boasting about his fundraising abilities. Some of the rules have changed, of course, but we've seen the Liberals doing a lot of fundraisers. And so I think if anyone's feeling nervous, it might be them over their cash arsenal right now. But at the end of the day, everyone's acting like they're gonna take it home.
Of course.
Spin.
Course. Yeah. And I mean, I know publicly they're going for government, but if on the inside or in their heads, they're vying for the official opposition status, having watched a lot of elections. If you're campaigning to be the official opposition, that's usually what you'll get. You won't get the government. So we'll see if they're going to change their tone as things go on. We're only now 3 weeks or so until the call actually happens. There's going to be a budget between then and now and then. So there'll still be lots to go on. And then once campaign gets going, we'll have plenty to talk about, Sabrina. So thanks again for joining me, and looking forward to speaking to you next time.
Yeah, can't wait.
Thanks again to Sabrina Nanji of qpobserver.com for that discussion. On Monday night, there's going to be a by-election in Quebec in the riding of Marie-Victorin. It's really an interesting by-election. The Parti Québécois is really hoping to hold this seat. The CQ wants to get a victory before the October provincial election. And the Quebec Conservatives, who have been rising in the polls, it's going to be a test for them too. So I hope you'll watch the results with me. I'm going to be running a live stream during the by-election night here on this YouTube channel. So join me on Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll be joined by Philippe Fournier of 338canada.com. We'll go over the results, and we can take your questions and have a bit of a discussion as well. So hope to see you there, and thanks for watching.